Hello, it's just David here with my weekly message. Um, how was Freedom Day for you? I think most of us, whatever our views, and I was looking forward to a bit of freedom as well, will believe that Freedom Day was a bit of a damp squib. I mean, not least because various members of the cabinet, I think, with uh, led by Boris Johnson, had to self isolate because of a COVID-19 case. Indeed, we've had one quite close to home in the team. Um, so it hasn't been the great opening up. Obviously, there are restrictions, and you see them in church, you see them everywhere, which have been lifted rather, and we can see there is a large amount of freedom which we didn't have a week ago. And of course, there are different views about those. There are some people are pointing to sort of higher infection rates with different variants, and then also other people are pointing to the fact that a large number of the population, especially older and the vulnerable, are double vaccinated and fairly unlikely to be seriously ill from coronavirus. So there are a variety of views. Say some people very much looking forward to it, some perhaps a bit nervous, and some perhaps just because of one thing or another, it won't make a huge amount of difference to how they've been living. Well, as I say, we will no doubt debate these things for long, and I mean, I slightly sigh because I think on the in the church and elsewhere, it's all become a bit kind of difficult, really. One feels that perhaps you can never do right, and there are different opinions about everything. But I want to sort of just go back to the notion of freedom because it's, I think, an important one. And I think an important one that before COVID-19, I've sort of preached on several times before, and I think we as Christians have something to say about freedom. We start with that Bible verse, that Jesus says, that you shall be truly free or really free. And that is one of the great promises of Christianity and faith. I mean, the defining story of the Jewish people is freedom after the Exodus, after leaving slavery. And we talk about it all the time. We talk about it in the Eucharist. We talk about it in baptism in particular. And as I say, it's not just limited to Christians. Most religions in one way or another will talk about freedom. I say for Judaism, very much about the escape from Egypt, from slavery. Muslims are a part of that Abraham inheritance as well. And, in the East, might be a bit more about sort of, freedom from worldly concerns and from the restrictions of sort of mortal and physical existence. But very much, freedom is a religious word. I think it's slightly different from our modern notions of freedom and political freedom. And that's what I want to just think about a little bit. And it's why, in a sense, I think that as we come out of coronavirus restrictions, we are, we shouldn't be surprised at what's happening. And in a sense, it's what Christians have been saying all along about freedom. And I take sort of Augustine's view that Christianity is summed up by the phrase, love and then do as you will. It's one of those sort of pithy phrases to Augustine, which is basically, you're free. You're free to everything. Like you get a lot of this to St. Paul as well, where lots of sort of the sort of slightly anarchic bits of the early church saying, "Hey, we're free to do anything," and Paul says, "Yes, you are free, but should you do it?" And that's what Augustine means. He says, "Yeah, as long as you're thinking of loving God and loving neighbor, you're free to do anything." And of course, that's what Jesus says. But of course, we know it's much more difficult than that because where are the limits of love? There are other rules that you can tick off, can't there? I can say quite categorically, I've not murdered anybody, so there's a big tick by my name. And there may be a whole host of other rules that some of which can be quite sort of clearly, ticked off. I haven't stolen anything, as far as I know, and certainly not recently. Um, but you can't tick off. Have I loved my neighbour? Well, yeah, all of my neighbours. The neighbours I like, some of them. Have I loved my close family? And even then, even the people I love most in the world, have I loved them perfectly? Have I never done anything wrong? And suddenly, as soon as you get into that, you realise the complexity of Augustine's diktat, which, as I say, also comes um, with other bits of Christianity. And I think, Christianity has always sort of wanted to get away from being a rule based religion. Now, I think we have to be careful here because obviously there are some rules. The rule "do not murder" is still an absolute rule for Christians. It's not sort of well, we don't believe in rules, so we don't want to be tied down by that. Um, but there is that sense of rules being just a restrictive way of going forward and not being a very good basis for morality. And I mean, I think you have to be careful because I think Christians and Protestant Christians have often wanted to say that other sorts of religion is too rule based. So I think, and I, have to say this carefully. Christians have sometimes said that Jews are very sort of law based, rule based in their approach, and Protestant Christians have said it about Catholics that they're very sort of rule based. I mean, actually, those two things are connected because I think sometimes what happens is that at the Reformation, sorry, it's a bit historical here, but Martin Luther sort of reads the Old Testament, reads the sort of Pauline epistle, reads the letters of Paul, and is thinking about the Roman Catholic Church and thinking that's very like the situation, in Judaism and Christianity at the time. And of course, they're nothing like each other. And I think, to be fair, both of those representatives of those religions, of Judaism and of Catholicism, would say actually that's a complete misunderstanding. And I think, in a sense, they're right. And in a sense, nobody likes a rule-based religion. We all agree we have to have rules, but everybody believes they're limited, and we don't really want them. And what Christians have believed is that, in a sense, we do all belong to one another. Yes, there is great freedom to do what you want, but it's not a freedom to please yourself. And actually, it isn't true freedom. And I think, the modern supermarket is a good example. I mean, in a sense, it's great to go into a shop that has the provisions you need. That's absolutely fine. But how many of us going into sort of a really big hypermarket, and when you see breakfast cereal, you see literally, I can't remember what it is, but several hundred products, and I think we're in a modern supermarket. We're talking about tens of thousands of products, and still sometimes you can't find the thing that you need. But I think none of us, if freedom is just having 500 breakfast cereals to choose from, I mean it kind of, that's a very weak, almost meaningless degree, well, not degree, a sort of freedom. Nobody feels that 500 is so much better than 300. Thank goodness. That isn't really cutting to the heart of what freedom is about. And I think liberal freedom has always said, and it's certainly a start. Please yourself as long as you don't hurt anybody else. And I think that's a good start. I mean, certainly, obviously, freedoms need to curtail you harming other people. That's why, yeah, murder is still wrong because you're free to do what you like, but murdering somebody won't be terribly good for them. So, and that's what liberalism says, and that's the modern version of freedom we have. So just wake up in the morning, please yourself. As long as you don't hurt anybody going through the day, then carry on. There is no moral kind of imperatives greater than that. Love and then do as you will says something rather more than that. In fact, quite a lot more. I mean, love and do as you will says we belong to one another, and that generally, yes, you need to have time for yourself. You need time to make sure that you have the provisions of life that you need. You need time for rest. You need time for enjoyment. You need time for leisure. All the rest of it, absolutely. But it also says actually that we belong one another. And it's not just, does this actually positively harm anybody? But actually sometimes, what am I doing to help somebody else? And what are they doing to help me? We are just more interdependent than we can't just sit there saying, I haven't harmed anybody. Actually, for human life to flourish, it's a bit more independent. We're a bit more interdependent than that. We need to have kind of relationships in which we actually not only don't harm one another, but actually help one another and love one another. And then it becomes, as I say, a bit more complicated. And I think probably, that's the sort of the way that we need to speak into coronavirus. And the way I think, in a sense, we're finding it out, aren't we? I mean, you could say, I'll do the absolute minimum not to harm anybody else directly. But of course, it's very difficult then to know exactly what level that might be with coronavirus, because, literally breathing, excuse me for breathing, well, actually could be a kind of quite dangerous thing to do in certain circumstances. And we're having to balance all sorts of other things. And again, this is slightly one of my sort of themes, is that when people say, let's look at the data, it disturbs me that people only mean public health data. We've got lots of data about what the economy is doing, about how people are feeling, about mental illness, about other forms of treatment being delayed for other things, including cancer, etc., etc. That's the trouble. I mean, there isn't just one piece of data that we can base it on. There is, 10, 15 different parameters that we're trying to balance one against another. And freedom kind of consists of actually doing your best in all of those. So I think that's, in a sense, saying, this is a complicated world, but for Christians, we've always known it's been a complicated world. The simple saying, oh, just do what you want, as long as it doesn't actually, harm anybody else, has always been a very weak idea of freedom, and actually will lead to a pretty selfish society. Actually, love and do as you will says, actually, yes, you are free, supremely free. But actually, we depend on one another, and we have all sorts of bonds of affection, of friendship, of family, of kinship, of love and ties and relationships that bind us together. And actually, working out in each of those what to do is the most loving one, is the most difficult thing of all. So, I think that, we should be celebrating freedom. I don't actually think the freedom we have now for a Christian is terribly different from the sort of freedom that we had before. I think freedom has always consisted of being based in love. And that's, as I say, quite different perhaps from the freedom envisaged politically by a liberal society. And therefore, I think that's why Freedom Day was so disappointing, because it didn't return us to the just do anything you want as long as you don't actually hurt anybody. And people have realised that's a bit more complicated. So love and do as you will, and rejoice in the absolute freedom that Christianity gives you. Thank you.